Welcome back, everybody. Hi, I'm Sandy Rosenthal, host of Beat the Big Guys. And today, my guest is from the great state of Pennsylvania, actually from Philadelphia, and his name is Ed Bisch. Welcome, Ed.
How you doing, Sandy?
I'm doing wonderful. So, a lot of exciting things have happened in the great state of Pennsylvania yesterday, November 8th.
Yeah, it was a big election, some surprises. I'm actually right across the river now in South Jersey, but most of my story takes place in Philadelphia, PA.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, thank you so much for making the time to be my guest today, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Before we start, I'd like to tell our listeners a little bit more about you. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Ed Bisch is the founder of Relatives Against Purdue Pharma. He is a member of the Opioid Industry Document Archives National Advisory Committee and member of several groups and committees battling overdose and fentanyl poisoning crisis. Mr. Bisch lost his son in 2001 after he took an oxy at a party. Mr. Bisch had not ever heard the word Oxycontin until his son Eddie was dead from it. And I'm so sorry about young Eddie.
Yeah. So going back 2001, so making a long story short, obviously, but 2001, my son went to a party, high school party. He was a high school senior. Him and his friends didn't know what they were messing with. Wasn't the first time he did it, but they had no clue. And the very first time I heard the word Oxycontin, my son was lying dead in his bed from it. And so I had my head down at the kitchen table crying, and a police sergeant came in and he said, Oxycontin, kids are dying left and right from this. I jumped right up. I said, what? How did I never ever hear about this? And kids are dying and my son's dead. And I watched the news every night. I read the newspaper every day. No clue what this drug was about. Right then and there, my first thought is we got to warn everybody. So within hours, um, me and my sister who was a nurse, she helped me. Um, we got on the computer and we did a Yahoo search. Google wasn't even around back then in 2001. And we saw these stories from Appalachia, from Maine, from Kentucky, nothing from Philadelphia about this drug Oxycontin, but like I couldn't believe what I was reading. And the more I learned, so that very night we started, this was in 2001. That very night we had fax machine. My mom had a home office. We started to fax the schools in Philadelphia to tell them, look, you got to warn these kids about this pill that can kill them. And, I started there. We held a press conference. Every news station in Philadelphia covered it. And ever since I've been involved in one way or the other, but it evolved. So at first, I just wanted to warn kids about Oxycontin and that, it could kill you. But I slowly started to learn. Eddie died in February of 2001. In August of 2001, the very first congressional hearing was held in Bensalem, PA, right outside of Philadelphia. And the reason why it was held there is because here there was a pill mill doctor in Bensalem giving out pills left and well, not giving them out, selling subscriptions left and right. And my neighborhood in Philadelphia called Fishtown, it was flooded with Oxycontin pills because of this pill mill doctor. So Congressman Jim Greenwood, who was a chairman head, called the very first hearing. So I still didn't know all the facts about Purdue Pharma and what was going on, but I went to the hearing and I sat there, and here at the hearing, Congressman Greenwood grilled the Purdue CEO. He said, I know you have IMS data, so you know exactly how many pills this pill mill doctor, who eventually got 30 years in prison, that's how guilty he was prescribing. Why did Purdue not notify the authorities? Well, the CEO started mumbling something, and then his lawyer whispered in his ear. Next thing you know, instead of the CEO talking, the lawyer's talking.
Mm.
And he's talking legalese, like evading the question.
Mm-hmm.
And the congressman wasn't satisfied. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, WTF, this doesn't sound right. And ever since then I started really looking into the company and kind of investigating the company. And more stories were coming out. So now, if no one's ever heard of Purdue Pharma or Oxycontin, I'll give you a crash course. On Hulu, there's a show called Dope Sick. You have to watch it. If you don't have Hulu, you can sign up for 30 days free. If you have HBO, there's a documentary, Crime of the Century. That is great. On Netflix, The Pharmacist, Dan Schneider, who will be a future guest of yours, his show gets into it. Also on Netflix, coming up within the next few months, there's going to be a show called Painkiller. So 2001 was the very first congressional hearing. So they knew something was wrong with Purdue then. 2003, the original book, Painkiller, came out, documenting Purdue Pharma's crimes. In 2007, Purdue was on trial. They actually pleaded guilty, the company, to a felony. So you know, talk about taking on the big guys. So in 2007, the prosecution team in Virginia, led by Rick Montcastle, who is detailed in Dope Sick, he wrote a 120-page memo proving felony crimes that Purdue Pharma did. The memo was never seen by the judge. 19 parents, many of members of RAP, were there to testify. We didn't know about this 120-page prosecution memo. We sat in that courtroom. We were allowed 1 minute each. We begged that judge to give the 3 Purdue executives jail time. The Judge Jones, was apologetic. He said he wanted to give them jail time, but he had to go by the recommendations of the prosecutors. Well, the DOJ brass, the very top, some say it was the Deputy Attorney General in the United States. They were lobbied by Rudy Giuliani, who Purdue Pharma hired. And that memo was never given to the judge. No one knew about it except a few people. So as it turns out, the executives, they were given probation. Purdue was given a record fine of $600 million. The executives were given fines of $34 million. At the time, it was a record. But guess what? That year, Purdue made $2 billion in OxyContin sales in 1 year alone. So for less than 1/3 of 1 year's profit, they kept on going. No one went to jail. So they were imposed with this, they call it a corporate integrity monitor. And it's supposed to be like this big thing. And actually, an actual live person gets planted in the company to make sure they're doing everything on the up and up. So they were given that. Well, years later, it came out that Richard Sackler, the leader of Purdue, the mastermind, the architect of the opioid epidemic, never even read this corporate agreement, never even read it. So after the trial was over, Purdue laid low for maybe a month, and then they hired more sales reps, and they were more aggressive than ever. And it is such a shame, because if that memo was not buried in 2007, literally hundreds of thousands of people who have died would still be alive. And so I'm wearing my rat pin to go back a little from that. So another thing I did, I started a website after my son died. And I started to get emails from parents all over the country. Some of them they lost their kids. Other people were addicted. And about 50% of the emails I got were from people who were originally patients. They were prescribed OxyContin and they wound up addicted or died. Purdue was trying to say it's only abuse of our drug. It's great for real patients. Well, that's been proven to be a lie over the years. The biggest lie that they said from the beginning was less than 1% of patients get addicted. That was an out and out lie. They knew they lied. Another thing they did, starting at the very first congressional hearing, they actually testified under oath. They had no idea OxyContin was being abused until I forget what year they said they found out, 2000 maybe. Well, here it's proven in company memos that in 1997, they knew it was being abused, and they didn't say anything. And the sales reps actually lied to doctors. All this is laid out in the book Dope Sick, in the TV series Dope Sick, in Crime of the Century. I'm sure it's going to be in Painkiller. Another book, Pharma by Gerald Posner. He details this. There's at least 10 books I know of on this subject. And you learn something new from every book that you read. It is truly amazing. So when I say I'm giving you the short version, I'm giving you the short version. And I had no idea. Like I said, I started the day my son died, faxing high schools just to warn them. And I started the website just to warn kids, but soon once I realized how crooked the company was, how dirty it was, it became twofold: to warn about OxyContin and to expose to the world the crimes of Purdue Pharma. And we're still battling to this day.
Is it all right if I jump in to mention something? Everything is 1,000% true. And the only thing that I can think to add at this point is while Purdue Pharma can be held up as a glaring example of how of an organization that knowingly harmed people, it wasn't just Purdue Pharma. It's the drug industry. It's the industry, but not to diminish in any way the evils of the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. But it's also an industry that's been going on for about 100 years.
Not at all. But Purdue, when I say the Purdue Pharma, the Sacklers were the architects of the opioid epidemic. It really started when OxyContin launched. And then, like I said, you have to read a book on it. It was no accident. The opioid epidemic was no accident. Not only were they lying to doctors, they funded pain organizations. They actually created pain organizations.
Mm-hmm.
They spent millions and millions of dollars. Richard Sackler, he actually said, we have to hammer the abusers. They are the criminals.
Right.
Now, not only did he say that, they put millions of dollars behind that by getting writers to write things, to get the pain orgs. They used to hire pain patients. They called them pain advocates, and they were contractors. And their job, this is before Facebook and Twitter, was to troll the internet, which was web pages, websites like mine, and message boards. And so that was
that's part of the harassment of anybody like yourself who is doing a decently good job of bringing awareness of this this evil to the American public. You were doing a good job of it, so that's why they went after your website.
Yeah, well, they tried to influence me because I didn't know this. So I'd have all these chronic pain patients tell me how great the drug is, and how all these wild stories in the news is hurting real patients. And here it was a coordinated effort.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're describing one of the things that organizations with plenty of money have. That's one of the tactics they use. They can't fight you with the facts, so they go after the person. And I'm going to mention, because it's so relevant, in my case, I took on the Army Corps of Engineers, which, like the pharmaceutical industry, had enormous wealth and resources to draw upon to go after and attack and harass and character assassinate anybody who's putting out a narrative that they don't like. That's what they do. That's what they're able to do. But for those of you out there listening, whenever you see this happening, you should be encouraged by that and flattered by that, because it means that you are right. And it means that if these large organizations are going to go after little you, I mean, I'm talking about scale here. I'm not diminishing saying that you're not an important human being, but on the scale, the great and powerful Purdue Pharma, the great and powerful Army Corps of Engineers, the great and powerful Chevron Oil, or whoever those petrochemical industries, if they choose to take all their resources and funnel them to go after you, it means you're right. And that is evidence that you should stay your trail. Ed, you had unparalleled moral authority. You lost your son, Eddie, to OxyContin. You had unprecedented moral authority, and that gave you a voice, a larger voice than other mere mortals that out here have, and you used it, and thank you for that. But I want to also point out to our listeners that you don't have to have moral authority to have such as extreme as that to get up and have a voice. Anybody can get up on a soapbox and speak up and make a difference. Ed, you mentioned something else that when Eddie first passed away, that you never heard the word oxy. And you already discussed with our listeners, you're well read. You know you're well read. We know when we're well read and when we're up on the news. And you said, how is it possible I didn't know about this? So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, so in 2001, so really the epidemic started in Appalachia, and it's well documented in Lee County, Virginia, where and like I said, it was no accident. Purdue targeted. They initially targeted areas where coal miners worked, a lot of manual labor, and so they started targeting it there, and then it spread out, and then as word amongst, I hate to use the word abusers, because yes, my son abused it, but he was a high school senior. He was a kid experimenting. Okay.
Yeah. I think that called recreational drug use.
Right. Recreational, whatever,
Whatever.
novice. But anyway, so eventually the word got around, and the word gets around a lot faster now. So eventually it was, and like I said, if not for that one pill mill doctor, my neighborhood never would have been flooded with OxyContin pills, but it was. And that's eventually how. So another thing I found out after my son died is, like, a cop told me, he says, look, there's a pill mill doctor. We've been watching them. We're getting ready to make an arrest. And sure enough, a few weeks after Eddie died, they arrested him. I'm reading the newspaper. I was irate to read that they actually were watching this doctor for 8 months, under surveillance for 8 months. In 8 months, he put literally hundreds of thousands of pills on the street. Okay. In the previous 3 months, I was told by a newspaper reporter that 21 people in the Philadelphia area died from OxyContin. So I don't know how many died from his pills, but my son got one of his last pills. And so I was kind of irate, but then, and you'll see this in the pharmacist, that the average time it takes to bust a bad doctor is 2 years. 2 years. So 8, but I mean, they need to make the law a little easier. Why not 30 days? If you're watching the doctor for 30 days and he's writing cash prescriptions, why does it take more than 30 days? It took 8 months. Like I
I'm in
said,
total agreement with you.
hundreds of thousands of pills on the street.
I'm in total agreement with you. That needs to change. You also mentioned that this wasn't in the news, and this is one of the things I try to impress upon listeners many times. Just because something isn't in the news, wherever you get your news, just because a subject or a topic isn't in the news, that is in no way a reflection on the work that you're doing and the rightness of what you are doing. Just because it's not in the news, we cannot look at the news as judgment.
No, sometimes you're on the cutting edge of it. And especially nowadays, even though we have the internet now and Twitter and all, a lot of news organizations have cut back. So you'll get the same big story 1,000 times. But a lot of the little stories you don't get. And like I said, 2001, this was a new thing. But in August of 2001, there was a congressional hearing on the crimes of Purdue Pharma. And it literally took to 2007. And like I said, justice was not done then. they skated it. They got off with a slap on the wrist, basically a speeding ticket.
Yes.
The prosecutors who actually wanted felony jail sentences, well, they looked at it at the time. They even said, well, this record fine. They'll send a message, and they could not have been more wrong.
This
And
would be a good time to point out to our listeners all over the nation that sometimes what you think in your mind, what is the best punishment or the best justice may not be what actually happens, and you may have to settle for a different kind of justice. I know in the case of the Army Corps of Engineers, no one at the Army Corps lost so much as a parking spot, even
right.
though it was the failure of their flood protection system that took the lives of over 1,000 people, destroyed the lives of 1 million people. No one at the Army Corps lost so much as a parking spot. However, the Army Corps of Engineers' reputation, because of that event, will never be the same.
No,
Will
right.
never be the same.
And like your story there, like my story with Purdue, we just want everyone to know the truth. And the more people know, the more outrage. And, we want to prevent this from happening again. You know?
And
So,
just because, no one at the Army Corps went to prison, no one in the Sackler family went to prison. However, there were consequences, and that we may have to readjust our thinking a little bit and accept the consequences that are available to us. But those consequences are nonetheless huge.
well,
Nonetheless.
let me tell you, yes and no. Okay. There was consequences, and like you said, Purdue laid the groundwork. Okay. So then other companies saw, and they saw what did not happen in 2007. So they just put the pedal to the metal too. There's another good book called American Cartel, and that basically picks up after Purdue Pharma, and that's about the opioid supply chain. So right now you're hearing about all these billion-dollar settlements. And literally there's been 54 billion in settlements, okay? But all these companies, even if they have to give 5 billion, they made 20, 30 billion. They're giving back over multiple years just a portion of the money they made.
It's not good
So
enough.
if someone says, Sandy, if you were unethical, let's do this. You're going to make 30 billion. Well, you might have to give 5 billion back someday. Well, okay, I'll take 25 billion in my pocket
Yeah.
if you didn't care about how many people
Scandal.
died.
It's a scandal.
And
Absolutely.
so I sent you a copy of an op-ed that I got published in Stat magazine. And
I did read
basically
it.
that's what it says. Until someone actually goes to prison, this is going to happen again because it is a moneymaker. And who knows what it's going to be next. So I'll give you a prime example. So this is another long story. Right now, Purdue Pharma is in bankruptcy, okay, which is a whole nother scam. But they also have a super strong ADHD drug, time released, that they were going to bring to market. Well, I am involved in the Purdue bankruptcy, and my group called the Ad Hoc Committee on Accountability. Us and other people made a big stink about this ADHD drug. So right now they shelved their plans to market it. But when this bankruptcy is over, they might market it or they might sell the rights. But so what could go wrong? A time release, super strong speed pill.
What could go wrong?
So you're just asking
for
and
trouble.
again, if a company says, okay, well, we can make $10 billion, maybe we'll have to give back $1 billion one day, they're going to do it. And that's just an example. And who knows? We can't see into the future, they have all kinds of drugs in the pipeline.
And again, it's the industry. It's a problem in the industry that allows Purdue Pharma to take advantage. And so thank you for bringing this to our attention. The more people that are aware about this, because we're all affected by drugs. Everybody, if you've ever taken one pill, and this is didn't come up with this line. Gerald Posner of the book Pharma came up with this. If you've taken one pill in your life, you're affected by the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh,
Ed,
yeah.
I couldn't help but notice that when you first got started in 2001, you used fax machines, which
Yeah.
I don't even think they exist anymore. So what I want our listeners to be aware of is you use the tools at your disposal. You
Right.
use the tools you have, and don't really worry about, do I have the most cutting edge? Don't really worry about that. Just use what you have. Use what's
Right.
available to you, and that will be good enough.
So, like I said, I started a website a couple weeks after my son died, and I started to hear from parents. So we saw an article in the paper about 3 Connecticut moms who did the very first protest against Purdue Pharma. They lived in Connecticut. They stood outside of Purdue Pharma with pictures of their sons. I said, that's a great idea. So I tracked down one of the moms, called her on the phone. I told her, that's a great idea. So we found out that Purdue used to send doctors to these lavish seminars at these ritzy hotels. So we found out there was going to be one in Orlando, Florida. So some of the parents I talked to, we said, let's go there and protest. And they said, okay, well, we need a name. What are we going to call ourselves? And that's when we came up with RAP, Relatives Against Purdue Pharma. And so RAP held the second protest in 2003 against Purdue Pharma. And it was in Orlando, and it made the paper.
Good.
And it got press. And you know, that's what it's all about. I just wanted people to learn and know what was going on. And in 2003, we're warning kids, you know, as best we can, don't do this. So now here we are in 2022. A lot of people heard of Oxycontin. A lot of people actually heard of Purdue Pharma. They might not know the whole story. But so now today, the latest thing is fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing more people than Oxycontin and heroin combined. And what a lot of people don't know is the drug cartels are actually making counterfeit pills. And they're making them to look like Xanax. They're making them look like Adderall. They're making them look like Oxycontin. And they're counterfeit, and it's pure fentanyl.
Wow.
And you got 14-year-old kids experimenting with pills, ordering them on Snapchat.
Wow.
And dying. Some of them are dying from a half pill.
Wow.
And when that happens, it's actually a poisoning. So why I'm bringing it up is, so nowadays you have Facebook. So it's a lot easier to get people together. And I'm in one fentanyl group. They have 22,000 people. They just held their second rally in Washington, D.C. It's called the Lost Voices of Fentanyl on Facebook. But talk about fighting the big guys. So they're trying to get the word out. They're trying to, make people aware. It ain't all overdoses anymore. It's literally poisoning. I just read a story, 3 brothers. They got together. They did some cocaine. They shouldn't be doing cocaine. Well, guess what? There was fentanyl in the cocaine. All 3 brothers died.
I did read that.
You just can't
saw that yesterday.
imagine And that is so horrible. But guess what? They were poisoned. You
Poisoning.
know, I mean, okay, they shouldn't have been doing cocaine, but they sure shouldn't have died from fentanyl.
Right.
And they need to track down that dealer and prosecute them all the way up the chain.
Yes, they
And
should. Ed,
hopefully they do.
earlier today, you mentioned something that's so important. I think we should touch on it just a little bit more. When you first got going and started your organization, and then when you showed up, I believe you were at a hearing where the CEO of Purdue had stepped down, but the attorney stepped in, and the attorney started using legalese.
Right. That was the very first congressional hearing
Hearing.
in August of 2001.
So I want to point out, and this is really critical, because that is the number one tool the big guys will use, or that's an example of the number one tool the big guys will use, and that is to avoid the issue and to change the subject. And by speaking in legalese, it was a method of avoiding the issue. It was a method of changing the subject. And then in this particular case, I wasn't there and I didn't hear it, but it also sounds to me like it was an attempt to confuse the listener.
Right. Right. Instead of a straight answer, he just deferring to his lawyer. What does that tell you? Anytime you have to defer to your lawyer, something's fishy there.
You're avoiding the issue, you're changing the subject. And what we human beings tend to do is when we see the subject being changed, we don't have a tendency to say, no, you can't change the subject. We're going to get back on the subject. And that is, it's critical that you recognize when that's being done. And often the ways that they change the subject is subtle, and you don't even realize what they've done, because these big guys are clever. And they make you think they're answering your question or providing the data you asked for, but they're really not. They're changing the subject. And as citizens of this great country, the United States, we don't have to put up with that. We can file records requests, and we can file information under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, a private industry, you're a little bit more limited with private industry, but with the government, you can ask for anything you want and don't back down until they give you what they want. And the government is definitely a part of the problem of the abuse by the pharmaceutical industry of the American people. And
So rap, when we started, and none of us are professionals. We were just grieving parents, but we wound up going to FDA hearings. We went to a few trials. We got to speak at the 2007 trial. Okay. So to make a long story short, in 2018, well, what happened is I kind of got burnout, and I sort of backed away in around 2012. I sort of backed away. I was paying attention, but I wasn't actively involved. 2018, I read the Massachusetts Attorney General, who just became governor, Maura Healey. She filed a lawsuit against the Sackler family themselves. But more importantly, that lawsuit was online and anybody could read it. And I read that, and I read the evidence they had. And I said, oh my God, I got to get back involved. So I actually called up some old rap members, and we got to do something. And so we started to write some letters and go online. Well, here, after that lawsuit and the evidence was there and other people could use it, next thing you know, there's 2,600 lawsuits against the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma.
wow.
So it came out, Purdue Pharma files for bankruptcy. I saw that headline. I said, good, finally. They're going out of business. They can't do no more harm. I started to read the article. And I was happy till halfway through. I read that as part of the bankruptcy deal, the Sacklers agreed to contribute some money only if they get civil immunity. I saw that. Almost jumped down my seat. I said, this is a bankruptcy scam. This is all about getting the Sacklers immunity just to cover them, just CYA. And, and that's how I got involved in the bankruptcy, which is another long story. It's never ending. So right now, to make a long story short, the bankruptcy, they were able to handpick a judge. Bankruptcy has some very bad laws. Legally, all you have to do is get a P.O. box anywhere in the country and say this is an office, and you get to, so White Plains, New York, Purdue's headquarters is Stamford, Connecticut. Everybody knows they're in Stamford, Connecticut. They didn't file for bankruptcy there. They filed in White Plains, New York, because there was one bankruptcy judge who was very pro company. So they got this judge, and we listened to a year of hearings, monthly hearings, sometimes bi-monthly. And this judge, if you were listening and you didn't know who was talking, you would swear it was a Purdue lawyer. It wasn't the Purdue lawyer. Mm-hmm. It was the hand-picked judge.
When you hear all the same lines over and over, there's a reason.
Right. So they got exactly what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? It got overturned on appeal, and that's where it's sitting.
And that's where it is now.
The appeal judge says, no, this ain't legal. It's called third-party releases. Another thing, this put a spotlight on some of the big flaws in bankruptcy, like judge shopping.
Good.
So there's bills in Congress trying to address judge shopping, trying to address these illegal third-party releases. This case might end up at the Supreme Court.
Wow.
So
you mentioned earlier, and I hope the readers, the listeners notice this, that you reached a point where you had burnout, and that is a definite possibility when you're leading a charge and trying to beat the big guys. Burnout is a real possibility, and we could devote an entire episode on things that one can do to avoid burnout. But even though, Ed, you did burn out, which is understandable, and I believe me, I almost burned out a couple of times myself. When it was time to reactivate your organization and bring it back, you were able to do so because you had an organization created, or a group created, that the fire could just be reignited underneath it. And that's something that I hope everybody was paying attention to, because that's really valuable. When you work to fight the big guys, you've created a thing that doesn't just float away. It will always be there. And in addition, we could talk all day about this. You develop friendship with people you might never have met. And relations with communities you might never have even known about, all with the work of the big guys, work of beating the big guys. So these are some of the positive things about beating the big guys. And it's always good to touch on those things, and there are lots of them when you are out there making the world a better place. Ed, is there anything, I'm afraid we're about run out of time, is there anything that you feel that you've just got to share with our listeners before I let you go?
Yeah, again, please watch Dope Sick on Hulu. Watch Crime of the Century on HBO. Watch The Pharmacist on Netflix. And watch Painkiller when it comes out on Netflix. And you will understand the crimes. And everybody who watched Dope Sick comes away saying the same thing. How are they not in prison? And they may never go to prison, We're still pushing for that. Last year, RAP held a rally outside the DOJ in Washington, D.C. And the prosecutors from 07 actually came and spoke at our rally. They're irate, which what? Justice was never served. And the DOJ has a chance to make this right. And we're pushing for them to do that. We had a Zoom meeting. I knew they weren't going to say nothing. They listened to RAP. They listened to the Ad Hoc Committee on Accountability. They listened to Danny Strong, the creator of Dope Sick, and they just need to do their job.
Thank
And
you.
we're going to keep on pushing.
Ed, I'm so sorry about the loss of your son, Eddie. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your work to bring the problems of opioid addiction to the attention of the American people.
Yes. And anybody who has kids, even college kids or even a little older, learn about fentanyl and they have to realize that no pill you buy on the street is safe. No drug, could be cocaine. It's not safe. You're literally taking your life, and there's too many people literally being poisoned, and that's the biggest danger today.
Yes, thank you again for bringing this huge problem to our attention, because now it's fentanyl poisoning. So all of you listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. Beat the big guys. And remember, you too can beat the big guys.
Thank you.
Stay with me.